Hello and welcome to Pride Inside. I'm Minnie, and tonight we are going to be discussing how COVID-19 has impacted LGBT communities from around the world. Now, before we do that, we expect obviously all of you to already be Pride Inside superfans. We launched yesterday. It is a 2-week virtual festival, and it's timely because it was yesterday that more than 50 years ago now, the Stonewall riots, of course, happened. Led by black and brown activists, they led the way and paved the way for the Pride festivals that we know and love today. Now, I'm going to do that horribly awkward thing where I introduce the panel and get them to introduce themselves. There's going to be a little bit of humble bragging going on. Starting off with Dr. Ranj.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ranj Singh. I'm a UK-based NHS doctor. I'm also a TV presenter. I'm an author and a very proud member of the LGBT plus community.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ranj. Now, the next woman that I'm about to introduce is Queen of the LGBTQ plus community. She is, in fact, live on her throne this evening. It's over to Lady Phil.
Hi there, this is Lady Phil, co-founder and executive director of UK Black Pride and also executive director of Kaleidoscope Trust.
Lady Phil, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your insights a bit later. But next up, this man has the most impressive bookshelf in Britain. It is Drew Dalton.
Hi, I'm Drew Dalton. I'm the founder and chair of Report Out, a global LGBT human rights organisation, and a sociologist at the University of Sunderland.
I can see cyber blushing about those bookshelves. Now, we were advertising this as an accessible event. We have to apologise. Max, our interpreter, is having some technical difficulties. So we're hoping to bring them to you later. But if not, then we will be able to show you an edited version with subtitles later on. But let's crack on with the debate. Of course, you can, on all of our platforms, get involved and send your questions, and we'll read some of those out at the end. First up, now it's a question which kind of gets routinely asked throughout Pride Month to lots of activists, but I'm going to kick off with you, Dr. Ranj. What does Pride mean to you personally?
I'm probably going to give the routine answer now as well. Pride to me, first and foremost, is a celebration. It's a chance for our community, our family to come together with our allies and celebrate who we are. But we must remember that Pride isn't a party, it's a political movement. We need to remember why it started, who started it, and how much we still have to do, because as much as many of us are lucky enough to be able to be ourselves and celebrate that where we live, that is not the same for everybody around the world, and we can't rest until it is.
And Lady Phil, for you, we've seen with the Black Trans Lives Matter marches in Brooklyn and in London a much more sort of grassroots protest movement evolving without the corporate float. Do you think Pride is changing what it means?
Well, I think society's changing. I think that we've seen such a groundswell of solidarity and movement building and capacity building. And when you look at the Pride movement today and also what happened in 1969, as Dr. Ranj talked about, you can't help but to make those parallels of the police brutality, black and brown people, and Latino X, and the Pride movement today, which of course is a celebration, but it's also about a protest in one where people have not necessarily seen themselves visible and amplified in a positive way. So it's really important that Pride is understood from many different levels.
And what does it mean for you personally, Lady Phil? Because you're such a kind of spokesperson for so many people. But if you look at the sort of personally for you, what does it mean?
Well, personally, I think that Pride is about unity. It's about solidarity. It's about love, hope, compassion. It's about equality. It's about diversity. It's about justice. It's about so many different things. And it's also about chosen family. Those of us who may not have family because we may have been marginalized or stigmatized by our own families, that we come together in hope and in light of supporting one another because of our shared commonalities.
And Drew, I'm going to bring you in now. Has Pride evolved for you in terms of its significance? Has it changed over the years?
Yeah, it has dramatically. I think when I first went to my first ever Pride march long back in the day, it was very different to what it is now. It's grown substantially. I think the movement has as a result. And I think, just echoing what everyone else has said, Pride to me, again, is a protest. It's something as a bisexual man I feel very visible at. I think it's something where we can raise visibility for other people as well. But I also think, bearing that in mind, there's a lot of nation states around the world where this can never happen or can't happen. Or if it is, it's met with resistance by the state, either water cannons and so on. The list is endless. But so I think it's something where we can kind of really raise and amplify the voices of people around the globe.
And Dr. Ranj, we kind of touched on this already, but with COVID, there's the stripping back of the sort of corporate pride, and people are really taking to the streets, and we're seeing a much more political side of pride. Do you think that's here to stay?
I think as horrible as this pandemic has been, it's reminded of us of a few things. Firstly, our need to connect with each other, especially connect with like-minded people who we previously would have met in person, but we now meet online and through other channels. And actually, it's reminded us of other people's struggles, that we're not by ourselves. It's reminded us of the importance of having that community spirit. And I'm hoping that, as you said, it's carrying on, people are reminded of the political basis of pride and the importance of that. I'm hoping some of that is going to continue to resonate for many, many years. One thing we must remember is that there are many young LGBTQ plus people who may not have been taught about pride, who may not, remember the history of it and why it's there. And I've been guilty of that myself. And I think we need to educate some of these people as well and remind them of why we have this amazing institution that is pride.
Lady Phil, just today, Keir Starmer's been criticised by some people for saying that the Black Lives Matter movement is just a moment as opposed to a movement. Is there a danger that lots of these protests are a moment and they don't continue to be a movement? What's your view on that?
Wow, well, Minnie asking me such a question. Well, I might give a politician's answer, but I won't. I think that anyone that talks about the Black Lives Matter movement being a moment has not really done their research, their homework, and their understanding of, and I give a very, very quick trigger warning right now for those who are listening, that when you see a Black man being murdered on the streets for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And this has been a continual problem for law enforcers that disregard Black and brown lives. This is not a moment. This is something which is about history, her story and their story. And there's a racial, systemic and structural issue at hand. So this Black Lives Matter movement, prides around the world and also in the UK context, it's not a moment, it's a movement. And it's a movement that will continue for long as we need it until we have equality, freedom and justice within our grasp, just for now and also for the future generations.
Drew, what about you? Do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement has helped the LGBT movement to be more political this year?
Yeah, I would like to hope so. I think with all movements, we hopefully shift forward together as best as we can. And I think that the two can really feed into each other. And I think this is a good thing. It's getting us to, I think with the LGBT community, getting us to assess our own kind of prejudices as well. And I think that's a really powerful tool to take forward with us and to move alongside the Black Lives Matter movement.
Now for some nostalgia. If you could take yourselves back to your first ever Pride and you could advise your younger self, given what you now know, Dr. Ranj, how would you advise young Dr. Ranj on his way to his first Pride? We could talk about the outfit, the mindset, the whole thing.
My first Pride wasn't actually very long ago. It was probably only 5 or 6 years ago, so it's relatively recent, I would say. And I mean, the experience was incredible for me. I couldn't believe the sheer amount of love that you just felt, within the Pride parade itself and everybody that was watching. And what would I say to myself? This is just going to get better and better. Like every single year, you are going to feel a bigger and bigger part of this. And you are going to have a bigger part to play as well. Your responsibility is going to grow. But you know what? It is going to get so much better.
And Lady Phil, have you got any advice for a young Lady Phil?
Oh my gosh,
Not that you're
yeah.
not already fabulously young, by the way.
Well, I'm not. I'm nearing 50, so I remember my first Pride. I would say to the younger Lady Phil, stay away from that girl because she is not going to be good for you. But I've still got exes. What I would say is that, this is going to be a moment in time where you feel and you see and you hear yourself and you're part of communities which are so diverse and so beautiful. Don't be scared and put your best foot forward. Speak up against anything which feels wrong and doesn't feel right. Just keep on gliding through and bring people with you. That's what I would say to younger Lady Phil.
And Drew, your advice for a young Drew without the boastful bookshelf?
Okay, so I think for me, I remember my first Pride was held in a students' union in Newcastle. And it's a very young 18-year-old Drew going through his very first one. I would say, first of all, echoing Lady Phil, stay away from that boy. But also, but on a more serious note, pay attention and get involved, because I don't think I understood the magnitude of Pride when I first went there. And I think for me, there's a big lesson that's about don't be silent. It's not a party. There's the protest stuff is very much behind it, and learn to understand that. So I think I'll go back and give myself a little shake, I think, for the first few years of my Pride existence.
Now, we've seen the pandemic disproportionately affect LGBT people. Dr. Ranj, what do you think has been one of the biggest impacts for the community throughout the pandemic?
Wow, that's a huge question. So basically, when we think about COVID-19 and think about coronavirus, some people have called it the Great Leveler, and that's not strictly true. So whilst the virus itself can affect anybody, we know that there are groups that are disproportionately affected by this. For example, the elderly, those with long-term health problems. And the thing is, when you've got a group of people like the LGBT plus community who already experience greater health inequalities and struggle to get the healthcare they need, stick a pandemic in the mix and it amplifies their health inequalities. Things get even harder than they already were. Now, the other side of it isn't what the virus does. The other side of it is then what does lockdown and the actual way we handle and deal with the pandemic do? For many LGBTQ plus people, the services that they would have for support, or the support systems and people around them that would help them cope and deal with day-to-day life, may not be there anymore. They may be greatly reduced. They're advised to be, indoors and stay inside. Their homes may not be safe for them. Some of them may not even have homes. We know that homelessness is a massive problem for LGBT plus young people, particularly. We know that older LGBT plus people will have a great issue with isolation and loneliness already. So even though coronavirus doesn't discriminate, there are certain groups of people that really feel the impact of it much, much more than others.
Lady Phil, in your own work, how have you seen the pandemic affect people, particularly in our community?
Well, I mean, everything that Dr. Ranj has just said. For me, working with Kaleidoscope Trust, which is an international LGBT human rights charity, we have seen the research that we've produced, which is about looking at the acute challenges of how LGBT people are facing the lockdown, state sanctions, the fact that access to food, water, mental health and well-being, which kicks in, the survival, the sustainability of civil society organizations in the global south, such as the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, the Pacific. What this is meaning to them is that this pandemic has intensified already issues that they're facing through colonial era laws where it may already be illegal for them. But from a UK context, I think we've seen that COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted Black and brown communities as well as LGBT communities. And as an out lesbian Black African woman, you can't divorce yourself from a pandemic and also your sexual orientation and many other different facets that make up who you are. So it's a worrying time for particular communities that are feeling the brunt of this. And and it's scary. It's worrying because there's so many things that we're contending with. We talk about the Black Lives Matter. You can look at Grenfell, you can look at the Windrush, then you look at this pandemic. It just feels like a constant assault on our bodies, on our minds, on our health, on our well-being, and puts people in a very soul-destroying, dark place at the moment. And can I just say that, when we talk about lockdown and social distancing, for many of us, we have been socially distancing for a long time because people do not like our beings. So I like to use the term physically distancing. And that is what's hard when you happen to be in a household that, maybe you're going through gender affirming transition and you're with a family that maybe religion and faith and belief plays a big part in how they live their life, and you feel scared and you can't access anything, and you don't even want to come on a live like this to listen to information in case of fear of being outed or doing something that will upset the family home.
What about that, Drew? Do you think you've been socially distant for years as an LGBT person?
Yeah, I think there's always that part of your life, isn't there, where that connection isn't always there. And I think you know from an earlier age, and I know for myself, sometimes you often feel that you feel different, and so you maybe not connected into kind of the mainstream inverted commas. And so yes, definitely think that's a huge part of that. I couldn't agree more with Lady Phil. If you don't mind, I think one of the areas I've seen some of the biggest impacts has kind of been not just the UK, but also globally. We're seeing, people being blamed and scapegoated for this who are part of the LGBT community. So we saw this happen in South Korea, in Seoul, for example, where someone who went to a nightclub was then therefore seen as the fault of the reemergence of COVID. Or in Turkey, where the president himself has actually said that being LGBT brings illness. We work at Reporter. We work quite heavily with groups in Uganda, and they're coming back to us. And we saw 23 of them arrested by the local police and accused because they were hiding away in a shelter for safety. They were then accused of spreading the disease, arrested, and then beaten and tortured. So I think as we look around the globe, it's worrying times where we see the impacts of this and how people can very easily be made into scapegoats as a result of this virus, which I find really disturbing.
Of course, rightly so, COVID-19 has dominated lots of the headlines, but has that meant that there hasn't been as much airtime, do you think, Dr. Ranj, for LGBT issues? Are they sort of falling off the radar, and some of the important campaigning that was going on before, does it sort of take a back seat? Can politicians get away with silencing a few causes?
Well, I think we've seen some of that happen, particularly in the US, for example, where rights were trying to be reversed, weren't they? And yes, some of the attention that we need has been diverted to things like coronavirus and COVID-19, but because it's now Pride Month, it's now our opportunity to bring those headlines back, to bring those issues back to the forefront, to remind everyone that, all those other things that we experience as a community are still there, and they will still be there when this pandemic passes, and they still deserve, all the attention we can get.
Lady Phil, what about you with all of the different campaigning work that you're doing? Do you feel sometimes that, the causes that you care about are being sidelined politically because of the pandemic?
Yes and no, because I think sometimes we as a community or communities are able to start shaping our narrative. And the lockdown has meant that we are connecting in very different ways and using social media to tell our stories and amplify it. I think you know, when we talk about Pride season, we're not just LGBT plus people throughout the month of June. We continue to be LGBT plus people, when July comes, when August comes. So I think that we've got to start utilizing the way we speak about our issues and also the way we celebrate our achievements and successes all throughout the year. But I have seen, things sidelined, but again, when you get a politician that, as you mentioned earlier, saying that Black Lives Matter is just a moment, we have to find a way to counter that and say it's not just a moment. And we've got to say, when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about all Black Lives Matter, meaning LGBTQI plus Black Lives Matter, disabled Black Lives Matter, young Black Lives Matter, and so forth and so forth. And that's what UK Black Pride sets out to do with many of the amazing organisations that it works with. It's utilising the conversation.
Drew, is there a danger then that we sort of pack up all our pride in June and then, we return, go back to our heteronormative world and then return again every June? Are you now thinking about how you can be proud sort of every day? Have you been thinking about that more?
Yeah, I think, I never shut up about it anyway, to be honest. But I do think, yes, I think we sometimes have a danger of doing that. We've kind of wrapped it all up in a Pride month, which is wonderful and it's great and needed. But I think sometimes then we kind of veer from view unless it's key points of the year. And that worries me a little bit. I think there's more we can be doing seasonally and around the year. But yeah, definitely. I think that's something at the moment we seem to have condensed everything into 1 month. I think a healthy spread right throughout the year, just paint everywhere rainbow would be good for me.
And Dr. Ranj, how can we stay connected? Because obviously we know one of the issues that people face is isolation in the LGBT community. During a pandemic, when we're all kind of in quarantine, what is the best advice, do you think, for people to stay connected and feel mentally well?
See, this is really interesting because before lockdown, I probably wasn't as connected as I am now because I ignored all these other channels, these electronic and online channels that have been in existence for ages, but I hadn't quite used them. So I've actually used lockdown and having to stay at home a bit more and change the way I live to try to actively connect with others a lot more, to check in with other people a lot more, because not only is the act of doing that really powerful for somebody else's mental health, just calling them up and saying, how are you, is so powerful. But for yourself, it gives you a really positive sense of achievement, and that helps your own mental health. There are so many ways that we can communicate with each other that don't involve face-to-face. As Lady Phil was saying, we can be physically distant, but that doesn't mean we are socially distant. That doesn't mean we are mentally distant, and it especially does not mean that we are compassionately distant.
So, Lady Phil, when the pandemic is over, if it's ever over, will you give up on meeting up IRL? Is in real life dead to you?
Absolutely not. I'm missing, human contact. I want to be able to hug and hold and feel. And human nature tells us that, we get something when we hug somebody. But for UK Black Pride, we've recognised already that we're going to be doing a lot more digitally, virtually, because, I think for a while, so many things have been very London-centric and London-focused, and we've been able to connect with people, who might be in Durham, who might be in Bristol, who might be in different places where they're unable to get to an event that takes place in London, which might be too expensive for them. So no, the physical meetup is not dead, but we will be a lot more creative and innovative about how we reach people and how we have conversations.
Drew, have you become creative about the ways you stay connected online? Are you part of Snapchat now? Has this changed for you, the pandemic?
I haven't yet reached Snapchat, I'll be honest. However,
we're probably too old, it's true, all of us.
I'm far too old for that. However, I do think it's made us creative, I think. I think I've seen some wonderful examples of brilliant panel discussions online, some brilliant webinars, some really creative ways of kind of bringing pride into people's homes and that connection that I think is really important. And it'll never replace the physical, it never will. But I do think, people have been really quite unique with some of the stuff. So in many ways, I felt in some ways, and only in some ways, I've felt more connected to pride in some ways this year than I have in previous years. It forces you to go to things, to watch things, to do things, and have that connection with other people that way. And I think that's a missing part of the debate somewhat. It's been really cool what people have been up to.
Has any part of you, Drew, kind of actually enjoyed being in quarantine? I know you're not really allowed to say this, but has any part of you kind of enjoyed getting rid of the social pressure and not having to go to things?
Me? Yes.
Yeah, you.
Yeah. Well, I've been teaching my classes online and, doing all that kind of stuff. And I've actually oddly quite enjoyed it. And I'm quite a sociable, extroverted type of guy. And I've really enjoyed it. I've got my books, I've got connection to people, I can ring my family. And I'm pretty happy. I've got my cat. What more do you need?
I've got to concur with that, actually, Minnie.
Really?
I found lockdown to be, in some ways, a positive experience for me, myself, because it slowed me down. I started to take stock of what I was doing. It helped me mentally organize. It helped me physically organize. I don't get FOMO anymore, which is great because nobody's doing anything. So I probably, and for my mental health, it's been a really good thing in that way. But I, just as Lady Phil was saying, I miss hugs. I need to touch people. And I can only do that when it's safe. But there's definitely that part of it that I have missed, but it has been helpful in some ways.
Lady Phil, have you found it to be a positive experience? Have you managed to slow down at all?
Well, I've slowed down somewhat. I'm not jumping on a plane from country to country, but I think Ranj and Drew are right. There's been a reset button that has been pressed. And it means that, you get to see where you're sat. You can think differently. And actually, I've never spent so much time with my daughter, and she's 25, and I don't think she really wants to spend that much time with me, to be fair. But, we've been able to talk about what life looks like in the next 6 months. What do you want to do, and how things feel for you? And we've been able to sit down and even watch a film together. And I was constantly on a plane from different country to different country, rightfully so, because my work required that. But that reset button has meant that I can enjoy my home, and I now know what I'm paying for as well. It just feels like, you have to find a silver lining, if I can use that word, in the context of a pandemic, when I know that so many people are going through different things. But I'm also using this opportunity to think about my own privilege of being able to be in my home and have a car and, connect with people because I've got Wi-Fi, and how do I make that better for others?
Of course, as you say, this is not an equal opportunities pandemic. Now, we're going to have some questions that people have sent in. The first one is, have you seen any amazing examples of solidarity in the community, or more widely since the pandemic? Have you seen sort of great examples? I'm going to go to you, Dr. Ranj, because you look like you're contemplating.
Oh, I'm trying to think.
Or anyone jump in.
I've seen lots and lots of online events happening, as Drew was saying, webinars and things, which I would not normally have probably attended. I had the chance to listen to some amazing speakers and get insights from people that I may not necessarily have been able to hear before. And I think what charities and organizations have been doing is trying to bring people globally together a lot more, because you don't have to do it physically. You can do it over the airwaves and through the wires. So there's been lots and lots of examples of that, and I've certainly tried to take advantage of as much of that as I can. For example, doing this right now.
Any amazing acts of solidarity, Lady Phil, that you've seen in the COVID times?
Yeah, I have seen so much solidarity. It's unreal, and solidarity that's not performative. Not tokenistic, just for a one moment period, I've seen young people having intergenerational conversations about, you know, what was and what is and what they want to see. I've seen charities and grassroots organizations working together. Like, look at this. We have Pride Inside, Amnesty International, Gender Intelligence, Para Pride, you know, UK Black Pride, and so many others who are part of this, that we're coming together and we're speaking with each other. That's solidarity within itself, and it's about how we go forward and continue to build on the success of what we've had and grow in ways that we've never seen before, because we're going to need each other when we start to go back to whatever and I do in inverted commas, a kind of normal looks like, or a usual looks like for us.
Yeah, do you think because we've stripped everything back that actually we have a Pride this year, Lady Phil, that has a bit more substance to it in a way? You know, there's less selfie taking and more honest conversations.
Well, I still like a good selfie bit on my
Oh, don't we
throne.
all? I'm just trying to be earnest.
But, you know, I do think that, you know, I think it was Drew that mentioned it, that he's more engaged with Pride. We're seeing so much. We have to connect via the internet. We have to connect via all these social platforms. And we're actually stopping to talk about Stonewall riots, to talk about Black Lives Matter, to talk about books that can teach us so much about the historical content, to hear from young people what they want. So I think that we have paused, and we're going to have a different look and feel about what prides look like in 2021, and also other events that happen like Carnival. That will look very different in 2021 because we've lost people and we've found new family as well at the same time. So it's going to feel different.
Okay, we've got a great question here that somebody sent in. If you had the world's microphone right now, what would you say and to whom? Lady Phil, I'll start with you. I mean, you can pick anyone.
God. The world microphone, I would say, wow, oh gosh, please people, in fact, I know what I would say. My mother has this quote: you do not inherit this land from your parents, you borrow it from the next generation. So it is absolutely crucial that we do all we can to fertilize the land, to cultivate it, so that we have something beautiful, equality proofed, and all about justice for the next generation.
Drew, enormous pressure. Thank you, Lady Phil. Enormous pressure now. We have the world's microphone and you have to talk into it.
Yeah.
What are you going to
okay,
say?
So I would, there's a few things I would say, I think.
Keep it clean.
Okay. So first of all, to me, it would be to governments. It would, first of all, to say remove those harmful laws. And that would apply in so many different ways, shapes and forms. I mean, we're seeing what's happening at the moment with the UK, with laws coming in from certain ministers or plans to come in which will affect our trans community, but also the colonial laws as well. We need to remove them. It's gone on too long. The legacy is hit too hard. I would be screeching and shouting at the governments of the world right now.
And Dr. Ranj, you're up now and the world's microphone is ready. What do you have to say?
I'm not particularly good with words myself, so I'm going to borrow from the late, great Dr. Maya Angelou. She gave this speech for a masterclass she was doing for Oprah Winfrey, where she talks about rainbows in clouds, and she quoted this old African-American song, which says, when it looked like the sun wasn't going to shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. And it's all about being a glimmer of hope, being a glimpse of positivity. And she talks about how everyone has struggles, everyone has clouds. We've all got more clouds right now, I think, globally than we've ever had before. What we need is kindness, what we need is hope, and what we need is rainbows. So just for a moment, just try and be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud.
That's lovely. And what do you think we've learned from COVID in terms of the virtual events that you've been to, throwing forward to a life hopefully after COVID? Are there lessons that you've learned personally?
Myself?
Yeah.
I've learnt that to show your compassion and that you care about someone and to connect with them doesn't require a physical presence. There are so many ways, and it's still so important to check in with each other now more than ever, I think, than before. I've seen huge groups of people come together. I work in the NHS in the UK, and I've seen what the human spirit can actually do when we face a challenge like this. And everybody comes together and pulls all the stops out. We are capable of doing this, whether it is for Black lives, whether it is for our healthcare, whether it is for trans people, whether it is for refugees, whether it's for disabled people or less able-bodied people. We can do it. We just need the drive and the determination and the kindness to actually just do that for each other, because it's only a matter of time before we may have another pandemic, and it's going to be even more important that we remember those lessons.
We've got another question now coming in. Can you please talk about how lockdowns affecting the right to health and livelihood of LGBTQ plus people in your network? Lady Phil, I mean, we've kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but how have you seen people's health being affected in lockdown?
Yeah, and it's a great question. You put that forward. You know, I did mention about, you know, us looking at the global south and how it's impacted international LGBT human rights activists and defenders and those that advocate for change, where mental health and well-being has come into play. And that would be the same here in the UK, feeling like you're in that very dark, soul-destroying pace because you feel isolated. Also, the access to health in terms of appointments that may be stopped, that you're unable to get to them, to get your testosterone or whatever it may be, whether it's sickle cell, lupus, the frustrations that are affecting people's health. I think the biggest one for me is not being able to connect with people who you have seen as your chosen family, and feeling that sense of loneliness and isolation, because loneliness can be so painful. If you cannot reach out and touch somebody and just connect with them, this is where we see all sorts of things. And you can look at like reports from the Albert Kennedy Trust about what loneliness and isolation and marginalization does to people. But I think health, education, housing, these are three main fundamental things that have to be at the forefront for LGBTI rights and for everyone's rights, really. Because if you can't access those things, you are in a situation, and this is why we do the work we do at UK Black Pride and the other organisations that are part of this. And I want to say, Dr. Ranj, thank you. You know, the NHS, we have got to understand that we have amazing LGBTI workers in the NHS and also so many different people. But if we didn't have the type of NHS we do now, we'd be a broken society. We really would.
Andrew, what about you within your own network? Have you seen people's health and livelihood affected by the pandemic in the LGBT community?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd go back to the example I used earlier about the people who were arrested in Uganda. When they were pulled out of the prison that they were in for about 50 days, they were showing symptoms of malaria and typhoid, and many didn't have access to the HIV medications as well. I mean, and so, you know, on a much more kind of global perspective, that I think the right to health is very much missing there. And so we're seeing that with people in terms of human rights and what has been withdrawn from them, especially when acts of torture are taking place. I also think this is, you know, something that fundamentally hits us back home as well, doesn't it? The isolation that can come with people who are stuck in a homophobic, trans or biphobic household, who, you know, really can't even access events like this out of fear of being found. And I think there's that bit of the, you know, it's great that we're going online and talking about the benefits of it and all that, but I think that has mental health effects to some people who perhaps feel more isolated than ever. So I think we're seeing this all over because, you know, in some parts of the world, people don't even have an internet connection that we're dealing with, or not a reliable one that isn't patchy anyway. So yeah, I think all of this impacts on people's both mental and physical health.
Yeah, and you make an important point. During the pandemic, LGBT people are, of course, much more vulnerable and much more isolated. And we've had a question in asking, what resources should people be using, Dr. Ranj, in a pandemic to seek help if they're feeling isolated or lonely?
Well, I guess it very much depends on where you're based and where you live. So look online, look for your local resources. For example, mental health charities, homelessness charities will often have links. Here we have the NHS website that has fantastic resources on there and links to those. There's a huge helpline directory, and that's usually mostly across the globe, I would say. So if you've got access to online, then that's great. You can access a lot of that stuff through there. If you haven't, then try to see what you can get as much through your usual channels, through your usual healthcare channels. But yeah, there is a lot out there. It just sometimes takes a bit of time to find it. And remember, during lockdown and the pandemic, services may have changed somewhat as well.
Lady Phil, what would your advice be? We've all been there when we were younger, struggling with our sexuality and not knowing who to call and who to speak to and where we're safe. And what would your advice be to people that might be listening and might be questioning?
I think where there's already helplines, we've got to remember the great service of the LGBT switchboard, the LGBT Foundation. You've got the Stonewall Info helpline. You have also got the Albert Kennedy Trust dial-up number. You have got Stonewall Housing as well. You've got Metro. And I'm mentioning all of these organizations because they have been paramount and at the forefront of supporting LGBT people for forever and a day. Maybe there's an action for us here after Pride Inside to make sure we list out these resources that those who are online can see what is there and what's available. But there's a lot out there. There really is. And of course, my shameless plug, I will always say, for Black LGBT plus people, UK Black Pride is also a source of information that can signpost people to the relevant parts of, our community services that are needed.
Now, I think we need to end on an optimistic note because we've been discussing so many different issues. Let's just say that by Pride 2021, we'll be out of the pandemic. What are you most looking forward to, Drew, if you do end up being able to go to Pride next year?
Well, this year was going to mark the Port Out's first ever Pride March, and lo and behold, that hasn't happened. So what I'm really looking forward to doing as a fairly new organisation is actually making our banner and going out there and marching. I'm really excited about that. In fact, I can't wait. So that would be mine, definitely.
Dr. Ranj, what are you most looking forward to about Pride 2021? Dare to dream.
Well, I'm hoping that Prides in 2021 are going to be more inclusive, particularly of queer and trans people of colour. I'm hoping that we're going to see more Prides across different platforms, as Lady Phil was talking about connection and being able to reach people in different ways that we may not have been able to reach in person. And also, I'm hoping I'm going to remember it more this year because I got too drunk last year and I had to go home early.
You're a doctor, you can't say that. You're a beacon of health. Look at those feet. You're a pretty healthy man. Don't shatter the illusion. Lady Phil, what are you most looking forward to about Pride 2021? Naively, I'm just hoping it's going ahead. It might not even go ahead, but let's just dream.
Well, maybe I want to get drunk. I want to join you there. I'm always organising. I am really looking forward to one this year. It's our 15th birthday, so we are not getting to celebrate it in its physical form. But next year, I'm looking forward to bringing on stage my amazing team that make UK Black Pride happen all year round and just thanking them and calling out their names so everyone knows exactly what they do to build UK Black Pride up.
What a beautiful, lovely note to end on. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we go. If you've enjoyed what you've been seeing here, then you can go on the website. And on Wednesday, we will be back at 7 p.m. when Elżbieta, the activist, will be leading the conversation on LGBTQ plus rights in Europe. But because we are only virtual activists and presenters, we're about to evaporate any minute now, I'm afraid. But thank you very much to my wonderful panel, Dr. Ranj, Lady Phil, Andrew. It's been wonderful talking to you. And thank you to you at home. Shall we all do a really cheesy wave, or is that just awful? Let's do it.
That's
Don't
weird.
leave me hanging.
That's weird.
Don't leave me hanging. It would be awful if I did it on my own. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And take care and stay well.